as Brian said, I'm going to introduce a bit of where we've been, and then that'll segue into where we're going to. So if you haven't been in any of the earlier sessions, no worries at all. I will give you a quick recap. And just, please reach out with questions, just scream. I with this, I can't really I could see you, but I may not be able to like fully see that you're doing a thumb or a question or something like that. So just scream out. It will not offend me in any way, shape, or form. So just please speak out if you have a question. That'd be awesome. All right. We're going to go through and dive in just a bit about me again, my background's in user experience research. That's how I got into product. I've done a lot in corporate. I've done a lot in big companies, small companies, agencies, startups, everything in between. I'm from Cupertino, so I'm actually from Silicon Valley. So technology is what I do for fun. And so that's a little bit about me. I always include a picture of Lancaster because he's right by my feet. And so if you hear a bark or something like that, everything's okay. I probably just accidentally tripped over him. All right. So from there, I'd love it if just everybody can introduce yourselves. So we got a little bit of an intro from, folks before, but please, just to get to know each other as well, please share in where you're from, location wise, where you're hanging out today, what stood out for you if you were in the prior sessions, and then how to get in touch. So often it's just LinkedIn that folks share, but it'd be great just to, again, to create that sense of community, extend it beyond circle and just, yeah, introduce each other. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Elena. Liana, sorry. Cool.
Awesome. And then I think, yeah, from Krish for context too. So Lyle, who was our executive mentor too, leading our Q1 innovation roundtables on brand strategy. So any questions, Lyle is the guru and leader on that as well. And we will have plenty of other great conversations as well with Shweta kicking off in July, and then with Francis in Q4.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So these are the pieces we've been going through. And so folks may know it from, anything from the Stanford D School to just, the common practice that you see a lot from, design, product engineering, et cetera, just the phases. And so we'll talk about those, how they come into play, how they're changing with AI, all those bits and pieces, but the framework is still very, very valid. And so what we did in the beginning, so the first session, which was in April, and that was about discovery. It's referred to as discover. And so just to get everybody up to speed, you got to understand your customers. What are their problems? What are the things that they're looking for your product to be able to do? And that's really where you dive in, you really get into their mindset, you understand their needs. You really, really bond with those customers. And I'll be perfectly blunt and direct. I get this question all the time. Can't I just use synthetic users? Can I just, talk to an AI about my synthetic users and that'll give me everything I need to know? And sorry to tell you, but no. The synthetic users are an aggregate. They do not have all of I'm going to say nuances that a human does. As humans, we say one thing, mean another. We'll be sounding really, really happy, but you can see from our faces that we're really pissed off. And so the synthetic users will give you a little bit of direction, but they're in no way, shape, or form a replacement for humans. You've really got to understand our nuances, what drives us, to make a decision. And it's often not what we say, it's an underlying thing that if you dig deeper and deeper and deeper, you'll get to. And so again, synthetic users are great just to get a starting point, but they in no way, shape, or form can replace speaking to potential real users in that discovery process. And then we went into definition, so define, and that's about narrowing that focus. Because in discovery, you're going to discover a whole lot of things, a whole lot of things you could pursue, a whole lot of things that sound exciting and you want to dive into, but you can't do everything. And so definition is where you narrow that focus and you identify those top things that you want to be able to explore. And so that's really what this stage was about that we talked about last month. And just being able to synthesize all that information that you took in and consumed during discovery, identify again that piece that you want to focus on, and make it clear, a problem statement that you're going to address, because that's going to be the rallying cry for your team, for yourself, just carrying you forward is that clear, concise problem statement. That'll be the benefit. You can call it the job to be done. That'll be the piece that you're really, really trying to address with your product. So from there, just a quick summary. In discovery, we talked about what's true. You got to understand your users, where they're coming from, their mental state, all of those bits and pieces. Then in definition, you got to understand their priorities of all of the things that you identified. What's the most important thing that you can address from them? And today we've got that insight. We're going to wrap it all up into a way to ship it into the real world. And again, ship may sound like something from, the pre-AI days, but it still applies. Maybe shipping a prototype. It may be shipping, just something that you hack together with Codex or something along those lines, but you still got to bring it to people. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So again, we're going to focus on development and delivery. So we're going to combine those two together, and I will dive in. So what does develop mean? And it means testing your idea. And that could be, exploring it through, something in Figma. You could use Figma Make. You can use, Lovable, any type of your favorite prototyping tools. But the key is to learn quickly and to reduce that risk to be able to ensure that you're not spending, I'm going to say expensive development resources. They're still expensive, even if you're paying for tokens. And so you want to make sure that what you're doing actually is worthwhile. And the way you do that is through iteration. You have an assumption, you have a gut instinct, you have data, insight around, your customers, what they're most likely going to value. You want to test that quickly. And so you put that into motion, and you want to get feedback from them. And that will allow you to determine the approach that you want to take. And it's an iterative loop. So even though this slide, you may interpret it as sequential, it's very, very iterative. You learn from that feedback, you make a refinement to your prototype, you test it again, and you really, really want to get to that point where, yeah, it's resonating with everyone. And so that is what you're trying to do, is to be able to iterate quickly through that idea, something that, people are going to resonate with. You prototype it, you test and you learn, and you just keep on going. And so you get to that point where you're going to talk about product market fit in the next series of talks. So you get more understanding about, when do you stop iterating? But typically you want to stop iterating where you get to a point that people would be disappointed if they couldn't use, that prototype that you shared with them. So that's the signal you're looking for. If you took away that prototype, if people couldn't use the product that you're, giving them a preview to, they would be pretty disappointed. And that's an amazing signal. And there's a guy, yeah, a lot of information from Sean Ellis, and you can research him online. He's got a great, first, he's got a great article just about product market fit and how you can determine that. But I know you'll learn more about that in the next series. Let's keep on going. And so from there, what we're going to do is we're going to look for that business impact. And there may be amazing things to build, and you may have a lot of resonance to build them. But if you don't have the capabilities to actually do it and maintain it and modify it and just be adaptive to the market, there may be a slightly different approach you want to take. And so that's something to think about even in those early stages, because you don't want to get so far ahead of yourself that you can't keep up, that you're not sleeping, that you're not hanging out with your friends anymore, all of those bits and pieces. So really, really think about what you want to build and the impact that's going to have on you and your team, and make sure you're set up for success. And then that scaling bit, I know everybody says, code with AI, but I was listening to a podcast very timely with Tony Fadell today, and he was talking to Lenny. If you're a product person, you know everything about Lenny. But Tony Fadell has a really great point that, I've seen firsthand, and others probably have too. The code that AI creates is pretty bad. I mean, it'll get us to a great starting point. It gets us to the ability to have something to get a prototype to put out there. But when you need something to scale, you really need development behind it. And that is something, again, you can do, and you can develop those capabilities. But just be aware that just coding something through AI doesn't necessarily get you to a stable product. that will scale and be the long term approach that you're going to take. So, Sam, you just shared something. You want to share it with the group? You can. Okay. Well, good comment from Sam in the chat. Oh, sorry. And so from there, just, yeah, again, keep refining, keep getting that feedback. I will sound like a broken record. There is never a replacement for getting feedback. And so, again, you want to continue to get that feedback from your customers to be able to iterate and refine what you're doing.
And I'll kind of chime in too with what
Ooh.
Sam's comment and what you shared here too, Diana. But like, because I remember even with Romely, with our first version, that was a lot of like what we initially thought was very different from our first live product, from what we first got our first revenue from. And I think we over validated what we thought, or we kind of did the kind of classic wrong thing of leading our customer discovery and understanding what people actually wanted. And so I think understanding a little bit earlier on and would have saved us a lot of hardship from like, yeah, like we had, I think at least probably three or so before we got to what actually started to work. So,
Yeah.
lessons learned for me on the early side.
Yeah, and I would say if folks do research into companies, Instagram is one, that always comes up as well as Slack. They did not start in any way, shape, or form like they are today. And so if you find yourself pivoting, that's, great. You're in the, the league of giants. And so from that perspective, don't feel bad if your initial idea isn't the one that resonates. Take the nuggets that do resonate and build on those. And that again is how, I would say 95% of the products end up where they are today. And that's a totally normal thing to do. Right. So the other thing I want to highlight is you're also competing against doing nothing. And what I mean is that customers have, their day-to-day flow, the things that they do every day. And when you're introducing a product, even in one that's amazing, they're going to have to change their flow. And so in some instances, just getting out of that, motion of doing the same thing is hard. And so there are times when, your product sounds amazing and the customers love it, but that hurdle of doing something different is really hard. And so again, you're trying to find that scenario that is going to push people out of their existing practices. And we're human, we get stuck in ruts. And so that's something to think about. What is it that's really going to cause people to change because you are competing against doing nothing, just staying the course and doing what we do day to day. So from there, what is deliver? All those bits and pieces we've gone through, you can see them here. But the key point is just you want to be able to have that signal, to have that signal validated and be able to turn that into measurable impact. So that could be, again, people that want to continue using your product. It's ideally someone actually spending money. You want to have those true signals that show people are committed and want to, use your product beyond just a friend or a family member saying, yeah, that looks cool. So from there, I know, I've mentioned a bit about AI, but just something to think about. AI makes it really easy to generate ideas, to be able to generate those prototypes. I know I use it all the time for a lot of what I'm working on, but that doesn't replace the human interaction. That doesn't replace talking to users, getting their feedback, being able to, understand their nuances and dig deeper into the things that they're not saying. And so again, AI is incredible, allows you to do a lot of these things more quickly, but it should never replace the actual human giving you feedback on your product. And so from that perspective, some ways that you can use it, again, prototyping, incredible. You can do A/B testing with it, which is amazing, a lot less lift than has been historically. I do use simulated users to get, a first round of feedback to be able to get refinement. And then, as I said, running it alongside all the people to be able to get that information. And the last one I just throw in because I think there's more and more personalization that's coming in from AI. And so our websites are getting more personalized, our applications are getting more personalized, our experiences are getting more personalized. And so, again, just something to think about is that if you build for today, you're already behind. You've got to think about the pieces that are coming in the future. And then, again, the future could be 3 months, it could be a month from now, but you've got to be aware of what's coming because that will allow you to ensure that it isn't out of date by the time you introduce your product. And it is a little bit of crystal ball, it's a little bit of predicting the future. But if you follow your market, you follow your competitors, you keep up to date on the developments, that's something you're going to have a spider sense about and something that you're going to be able to apply. So again, think about how you're going to do things in a way that isn't just, valuable today, but also gives you runway into the future. And for me, that's looking at personalization. Yeah. Question. Go, Chris.
Yep. I just had a question. What exact AI tools are you using for automated testing and feedback?
Yeah. For automated testing and feedback, we talked about one last time, and it's called Where's Waldo? There's one called Waldo. And so use that for testing. There's other ones that I'll find the slide from the last series and send that to you or just tag you in the notes that I shared out last time. But there's tools to be able to use that we discussed in the last session. So I can give you those slides so you can see those. But Waldo's a really good one. Dovetail's a really good one. For synthetic users, I use Rally. So those are good. A lot of the other tools that I've used historically have pivoted more towards enterprise. So they're really expensive now. So I tend to just, ask Perplexity for some of the tools that, replaced the ones that I was using, but are now too expensive. And Perplexity will give me a good list. And then I try them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And yeah, if you want to start with those notes, I'd be more than happy.
Yeah. I'll
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you.
And then quick question too, given I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on this. So obviously with Fable and a lot of the newest Anthropic models that have kind of gotten banned earlier this week. Granted, I my co-founder did a lot of that coding with previously and Opus, and these have still worked very well. But is there, curious to just hear some people's thoughts on that too, and what eh, do you obviously you want the best, but like how important is it to kind of really shop around these different models versus I know Claude's kind of the go-to, but like what are you seeing from all these different types of AI tools and how quickly these other things are evolving across Gemini and Anthropic and all these other companies?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes to, I'm going to say personal preference. Because I'll be honest, if you talk to, some people, you get, a certain guidance. I follow, again, How I AI is a great podcast. I follow a lot of what Lenny's talking about. I follow a newsletter called Every. And so find those sources that really resonate with you and, learn from them. With Fable, folks were just saying it wasn't necessary. It was really, really expensive. You went through tokens extremely quickly. And so folks were saying unless you had like an unlimited budget, they weren't even going to touch it. And then it got pulled. So that's okay. The other thing that's starting to happen more with the models themselves, Codex is a great example. Depending on the task, they're starting to get smarter to be able to route to different models depending on what you're doing. And so, again, right now, that may be something that you want to do as part of your, your agent approach, your test harness, et cetera. But the models are getting better so that they're actually starting to be able to route you depending on what the task is that you're actually doing. So right now, exactly as Brian said, I think we do need to be aware of it. And a lot of it, to be blunt, has to do with your budget and then again, what you're trying to do. But I think the models will shortly take over for that because most people don't want to have to think about it, nor should they. So I think it'll get pushed down and we won't necessarily have to think about that as much unless we want to. In regards to usage just in general, folks tend to use Gemini, just for facts. Google, the Google LM is great to be able to condense and consolidate, get a great overview on a bunch of different documents. So folks will tend to use that for more document analysis. For coding, again, that's a little bit of a personal thing, but most folks will bop back and forth between Codex and Claude. And then the other pieces around it is Claude is still the preferred path for writing. It tends to have more of a reflective nature or adapt to your style, where OpenAI tends to be more just, I think, blunt and direct is the phrasing I would use. But like most people, I bounce back and forth depending on how I'm feeling, and if I've run out of credits in one place, I'll bounce to another. Mm,
Lyle, you got something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I have a client that is raising capital for a SaaS product. And in the time that we've spent sourcing capital, the build process has changed almost 100%. And the numbers have been cut in half, and we're seeing development teams really no longer leading the coding, but being the source that evaluates AI developed code, fixes bugs, finalizes the stuff. But it's changing so rapidly that our cost model changed within a matter of months as we're trying to figure out how to raise money. It's interesting how fast it's happening.
yeah, and there's a lot of discussions online just about, essentially the price points excluding most people. And yeah, I live in San Francisco, so you got a bunch of people running around outside my window who can pay $200 a month for a top model. That isn't normal. And so again, I think Lila, you're 100% right. The costs are going to continue to come down because if they want people to use them just in general, not be, someone from, Silicon Valley or New York or a tech hub or just, a builder, then you're really going to have to do something about it to make it more accessible.
But the way they're developing is changing as well.
Yeah, they're doing things very, very quickly. Things are coming out, every week. And so that's why I was saying, think about the future because chances are, if there's something you're struggling with and spending a lot of time on, if it's something that, is tying back to the model may address it. And so those are things that we're looking at, from the startup I work at is like, we're not going to build certain things because we think the models are going to. You've got to decide when you want to take a bet. But yeah, exactly as you're saying, Lap, things are changing really
Yeah.
fast. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Sam. I 100% agree with you. And then, sometimes I hit my limit and I've got to wait 3 hours. I bounce over to my other product or another account and just keep on going. So, yeah, totally understand. But yeah, it's an interesting space right now around how quickly things are changing. But as I said, I mean, if folks were talking about when Claude's code was made public, again, developers have a certain mindset, but they're like, the code was crap. I mean, it was not effective. It was not going to scale. There was like all of these loops that didn't need to be there. It was inefficient. So yeah, there'll be claims that our code was made 90% by AI, but do you really want your code to suck? And that's where we are right now. And the other piece that I would say is, developers get to a point where they wanted to build. And for a lot of developers, I know looking at code and fixing AI's bugs is not building. And so we're also finding other developers that are using AI, to supplement, to do things faster, but they're still writing code because that's what they like to do. And so I also believe that AI, whatever your superpower is, makes your superpower even more special, but don't lose that sense of you and what you really like to do. So I don't know if folks follow Basecamp at all, but yeah, Basecamp, I was listening again to podcast, but they were just talking about how all the developers who work on Basecamp, they code because that's what they like to do and they're good at it. So they're going to continue to code. So again, don't replace your love with AI just because AI is there. Continue to do what you love and hone your craft. So what I'm showing is just something that we've gone through in the prior sessions too, just this iterative loop. And that exactly, building on what Lyle said, things are changing really quickly. They're iterating really, really fast. And so, you've got this opportunity, something that you want to pursue. You build that prototype really, really quickly. You iterate through that. You then put it out to, friends, family, etc. Get some feedback. You find a design partner who's going to be more aligned to your actual representative customer. They are often someone who, is paying you to get that early access. Iterate with them and then you bring it to market, go more GA, go general availability and make it available to larger group of people. But again, nothing stops there. You get feedback, you keep iterating. So it is this ongoing cycle. And AI is really, really amazing at that concept and that prototyping and that iteration. We can see it moving around the stack. But again, to make something solid and scale, where we are today, that is still requiring that human touch. I just put this in as well, just because I liked how, the different pieces, some folks were thinking more about the visual on the left. It used to be that waterfall. You would go through and do discovery and develop and build and launch and measure and all those bits and pieces. Now it's just this ongoing loop. And so, as we talked about, you do that discovery, that definition, you build it and test it. AI is a really, really great way to do that loop. You launch it, you measure it, you continue to learn, and then you make improvements. So it's just that ongoing cycle. AI enables you to do things faster. It enables you to do those iterations faster. But again, we're never done with a product, and that hasn't changed. You continue to get feedback, you continue to refine, but with AI, you can do it faster. So, as I said, we're getting faster to, from an idea to a launch. But that means we've got a lot of ideas and we can test a lot of them. How do we know which ones to test? And so that gets us into this build bit. Really like this quote from Reid Hoffman. If you're not embarrassed by what you're going to put into the market, you've waited too long. And so all of us probably have a little bit of that perfectionist tendency as we're on this call together. But it's something to try to nudge you out of that specific comfortable space because you want to get feedback on your version in an early stage. And humans feel better giving feedback on something that isn't perfect because we don't think that we're hurting someone's feelings. And so if it's rough, that's awesome. We feel more comfortable to give feedback on things that aren't perfect. And so if you're waiting and waiting and waiting, just put it out there. You've waited too long. And way to think about, what it is that you want to put out there. There's something called the Eisenhower matrix, and it's on the left-hand side, that impact versus effort. And so again, in product, there's always various models you could choose from. A lot of folks use that one on the left. So they'll put a sketch out of all the different things that they're considering building or launching. And you think about the impact that they're going to have and the effort it's going to take to do it. And so traditionally, you wanted to go with something that had high impact, low effort. You could put it out there, you can get feedback on it. It's something that, you know from your discovery, it's really going to resonate with people. Go for it. It's something you want to consider. I like the right hand side because it makes it a little bit more actionable. So when something again is low effort, high impact, go for it. That is something you definitely want to pursue and see. But also things that are high effort, high impact, there's a moat around them just based on the fact that it takes more effort to do it. And so from that perspective, if it's something, again, you're really passionate about, you've got this instinct about, you've got data points around it, that definitely is something you could pursue too. Because again, just that high effort is going to be something that prevents other people from going that way. So I like the right hand side. It just expands it a bit. That's one model. Another one is rice. Rice, if you're a product person, is probably something you're really familiar with. People often add a B in front of it and call it Bryce, so it's business. But you want to look at the reach. So again, how many people are going to be potential audience? Are you going to impact with your idea? What's the impact that you're going to have with them? This is a way to measure it. So this is essentially an equation that you write out for the capabilities that you're thinking of building. And you do the math, and that helps you determine which ones you're going to go for. So again, rice is an option. That Eisenhower matrix on the prior side is an option. Sometimes people combine, but just choose the one that resonates most for you. And so I'll give you a couple of variations. Again, depending on the company I'm at, I've used some of these, I've used all of them. It really depends on, the people that I'm working with and what feels right. Yeah, why?
What are the attributes in business if you add the B in front of rice?
Yeah. So the B for business is about the business goal and objectives. And so even though, the rice piece may be really, really good, if it doesn't align with your business's goals and objectives, you can think about their mission. It's probably not something you want to pursue. You want to make sure you're building for things that actually reflect your business.
Yeah, I'd say that should be the first thing you do.
Exactly.
So my question was, is a lot of this like, I don't want to say it's subjective, but like how often do we like often we think, yeah, like this is going to have a huge impact. And then our customers tell us they want this. And then they say they're willing to pay more, right? But it either doesn't convert or it ends up being that kind of like in that bottom right corner. Like, I'm sure maybe you don't have one of this thing. Is there like I'd love to see an example of like a company or something that like has used this framework or shown like, hey, like with Slack, here we wanted to roll out, Canvas. And so it was like it took 50 engineers, right, and like a 7 months worth of work, blah, blah, blah. And it did this. And now we realize like I guess yeah, I'd be curious how if there's any examples or whether it's out there that shows how companies have, whether it's this framework or the other matrix you've showed. Because to me, like you can do so much research, but sometimes it just doesn't always match up. So curious how, and maybe that's just part of the journey, right? But
Yeah, I think you hit it right at the end. It's part of the journey. And oftentimes people are so passionate about the thing that they're doing, they're just going to go for it anyway. And that's part of the conviction of a founder. And, that's amazing because sometimes you find that you're right and the data was wrong. You were just essentially, forging the path, and people needed to have something, as part of their lives. They needed to have something that they were interacting with on an ongoing basis before they really felt that, attraction or that adoption stick. And so, yeah, there are going to be times that the numbers don't show, but I think you get to that point based on reading between the lines and observing your users in their natural habitat. What is the thing that they just navigate around, but don't even notice that they're navigating around it? And so there's often things we do in our lives that we've adjusted just because of, we get used to it, and sometimes those things are the really tricky points that if they're addressed, they really save us a lot of time and energy. And so, yeah, sometimes you throw away the frameworks and you go with your instincts. But I think the frameworks are a really great way to narrow and to get to those couple of things that you want to run with. And then from there, yeah, I think gut instinct is a good characteristic too. But, to go back to your original question, if we again to go back to, well, I would say like Meta. Like if we think about, Mark Zuckerberg and all of his bets on, the metaverse, he was all in, had all the data. Nope. Just laid off all the people who were working on it, totally pivoting in a different path. So even these amazing companies that we track, et cetera, sometimes it just doesn't work. But you got to think about what your capacity is for those pivots. Obviously, Meta's in a slightly unique space in regards to their funding, et cetera. Think about, the cost of a pivot and what it would be for you. So the one I like is Moscow. And so, you sit down with your team and you go through what are the things we must have? What are the things that we should have? What are the things we could have? What are the things that we're not going to do? We won't do. And so we go through this, in the company that I work at. This is how we put things into buckets to be able to build. We use, customer insight, et cetera, from, discovery, et cetera, to be part of the factoring in. But we use Moscow just as a quick and easy framework to be able to then prioritize the capabilities that we're building. Common pitfalls, as we've been talking about, falling in love with an idea. This is the way we're going to go. I just know it's right. Don't care about the data, just know it's right. Be aware of that. Sometimes it's going to be right. I mean, again, iPhone didn't have a keyboard. Folks were like, no one's going to use it. The BlackBerry has a keyboard. Everybody's going to want it. So we get used to things. We like it. It looked amazing. It was small. It was something that, had a design aesthetic. All of those bits and pieces. It was a better device. We switched. So make sure that, that idea that you're falling in love with, you got to have conviction and you've got to have the ability to support it to see it through. Overbuilding the prototype goes back to the quote that I shared before. If it's perfect, too late. You got to put it out there when it's ugly. Don't worry about people saying your baby is ugly. It's one you love. Don't worry about that and just get that feedback. And the other piece around it is when you're seeking that feedback, identify what you want that feedback to inform. And so when you're thinking about, speaking to users, come up with those questions, use those questions consistently to be able to gather insight and be able to do that analysis across all the people that you speak to. And so again, think about it in a thoughtful way that allows you to gather insight and apply it in a manner that's, consistent. If you're asking different questions of different people, it's going to be very hard to be able to analyze the feedback you get and determine a path forward. And then one I throw in there just because I like it is Wizard of Oz, and you can do this really well with prototyping. So again, talked about the prior slides. And question maybe, how do I know? Put it out there, but don't make it perfect. Again, to go back to that quote from our friend at LinkedIn, or I guess he's no longer there. But anyway, what you want to be able to do in this manner is have a human behind the scenes. And this is especially true with AI. You can automate a lot, but there are pieces where you just want to get started. Again, you want to get that signal, just put it out there and then have a human behind the scenes doing a lots of the pieces. And that allows you to get feedback faster. That allows you to pivot faster. That allows you to make refinements faster. So again, you don't need to build out the back end. Think about the smallest thing you can test and then have a human do the lifting behind the scenes to be able to get information that will help you determine if this is the path you should go or if there's a pivot you should make. So I'm going to give an example. I work at a startup. We build an innovation assessment. And so how did we put all this into practice? So what we did is we just built a lo-fi version of our assessment. It's 16 questions. We put it out there on paper. I went to an event, handed people pieces of paper. They filled out the pieces of paper. I coded it back in and we analyzed it. It took us about, 10 minutes to set up. It took people 10 minutes to take the test. And then it took me about, 30 minutes to enter. And I got amazing data. Didn't have to spend time coding anything. Didn't have to spend any time, using my AI credits. Quick, easy. Got the information I needed. Was able to ask people questions, gather feedback. It was amazing. From there, we built an online survey with an AI backend. And so again, did that prototyping. That allowed us to make some of the refinements, the questions that people had that I picked up in the parts from the paper testing. Also was able to incorporate their feedback into some of the branding and the positioning. So took that feedback to be able to make this medium 5 version. That was a prototype, done with AI. And then where we are now is we have a product. We've got AI elements in it. We've got, developer coded elements in it where we need it to scale, be more reliable. We can't allow for hallucinations, et cetera. So those are the steps we went through. And it saved us a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of cost. If we had just jumped to that high five, there would have been pieces we would have thrown away. And that would have been costly. If we had just jumped right to that AI bit, I would have been spending a time on with AI what I didn't need to do. So don't throw away those really easy starting points just because they're easy. Don't worry about that. Get the feedback. Do the feedback, quickly and be able to go to a broader audience than you could and talk to those people. And that will save you time. So here's some of the tools that we use, just a common stack. You'll see this quite often, from an AI perspective, just these tools. But again, just sharing to give you an idea of what we did. And then from there, how did we do it all? As I said, we put out the questions on paper to test those assumptions. Are people going to go through 16 questions? We learned that people started to identify patterns in the answers. And so through that paper version, we learned before we even coded anything, we've got to randomize the answers because otherwise people are just going to start picking up the patterns. So again, very, very valuable learning just with paper. Then we were able to evolve, from the customers who gave us that feedback. We keep learning today and are making changes and refinements. As we were talking about earlier, some of the things that we really thought would resonate with people, they're asking, getting confused and they want us to change. So even though we were really passionate about things, 6 months ago, the feedback, that we got means we're going to have to change. And so always be okay to throw things away and make changes, but do so in a way that you can manage that doesn't affect your progress and is something that you can adapt and incorporate. So here's some more tools. We were talking about tools, from the prior version. Again, I'll do the slides out, just to get folks an example of them. But these are just tools to think about as you're building. And these are common ones. I think Clerk is really, really common, Superbase, Resend. SendGrid, similar to Resend in a sense, but a lot of great tools that you can use just to get things started. And again, my friend Lenny, I'm a product person, so listen to his podcasts and everything he does from a newsletter perspective, but he shares out these studies. So again, coding what folks typically use probably changes all the time. Do an updated version, you'll see different things, but the tools here will stay. Their order just may bop around a bit. And next, you're going to ship things. So Noble, again, great newsletter if you're looking for newsletters, but Noble's always about, what is going to make you stand out? What is going to make you different from your competitors? Because the thing right now is so easy to build. And I'm not saying to build something good, it's just really easy to build. We have competitors, we can put that in quotes everywhere. And so the thing to think about, and this goes back to the Eisenhower matrix we were talking about, what's the thing that your competitors are scared you're going to do? And so again, that's why there's value in that high impact, high effort area, because competitors don't think you're going to go there. It takes a lot of effort, but maybe you do. Maybe you have the people, who are passionate about that high impact, that high effort area. Maybe that's something you do pursue. So think about your competitors when you're doing your work because you want to be doing something that they're just not going to copy. You want to be unique yourself, etc. There are going to be things that are expected because competitors, the market have trained us to expect them. But what's that thing that's going to be unique to you too? And so from there, business model, lots of different things, that go into here. We've got 15 minutes left, so I'm going to, introduce a taster into business models. I think this is something you guys will cover more in the next sessions as well. But there are different, ways to think about the business models. There are, foundational elements in regards to covering your costs, et cetera. But the different types of pricing strategy that you take is going to be based on the product and how you're selling it and who you're selling it to. But the thing I would keep in mind is just, there is likely something out there that's already filling that gap and it could be doing nothing. And so when you think about your positioning and your placement, you've got to be aware of what you're competing against. And again, I will repeat, you may be competing against doing nothing, not doing a change. And so think about what it is that's going to make your offering worthwhile for people to change from what they do today. And so here's some business models, they still apply, they're still being used, they're still applicable. And just, again, there isn't one right business model. It depends on your product, your offering, what you want to do in regards to the market, who you are working with, et cetera. But they're just models out there. And folks often wonder, why is pricing important? Pricing is important because that's how you stay in business. And, it's often overlooked as a lever that you can use for creating value to your customers, but it's huge. And so again, we think about, Fable, as Brian talked about. Fable was really expensive. But for folks who, tried it, for the 5 minutes that they were able to use it before they used all their credits, yeah, it's good. I mean, it's getting better. But that doesn't mean it's the best. And so what is the thing that your customers are going to value? How much are they willing to spend on that? You can do testing around that, but you've also got to ensure that the pricing that you're charging can cover the costs that you're incurring. Because if you don't have profits, then how are you going to stay in business? And in the beginning, yeah, we do things, with eating, soup or cheese or whatever it may be to stay in business. But you get to a point where that, isn't necessarily the life you want to have. And so how do you start thinking about factors such as pricing to get you to a point where you could have profitability in a run? So, how do you optimize it just from, a metric or an approach, a framework to use? Think about, the revenue that you're going to do. That's still the common way that people approach the market. The profitability, how much are you going to get out of that revenue? And then what is the likely market share that you can take? Some folks are very happy with a small slice of the market share. That is something that allows them to have that, that top niche, which is great. Again, it depends on the place in the market that you see your company and you want to fit. And then value, again, this is something to think about. We often underprice our products. And so, again, something to think about. It often is something you want to consider and maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable about, that you can always decrease a price. It's harder to increase it. And so if you're going out into the market and you feel like, hey, I'm getting signals that my customers may pay more, have them pay more. Because again, it's easier to go down than it is to increase your price. And so just, again, some factors you want to keep in mind. You've got to make sure that you can justify that pricing. So what is the things, the value that they're getting? But again, this is an area where really talking to customers is extremely valuable because you'll get a sense of what they will pay for and where is it that they'll say, nope, hit my limit. Water is always a fun one just to use as an analogy for pricing. I mean, we spend an amazing amount on water and it's water. So just think about all the different factors that come into what makes someone comfortable with a price. And, Lyle covered this amazingly in all of his sessions, but a lot has to do with, your branding and what you stand for and, the effort you put in and who you're marketing it to. But this is always a great one if you're thinking about, I can't charge more. Yeah, you probably can if there's resonance or signal that people are willing to pay for it. And so water is a great example of this.
Consider liquid death.
Yeah, totally. Like go after that name that's cool. And people are like, yeah, I'll drink water now.
I'm all about Fiji. I'll drink anything, but Fiji's the one for me.
Yep, totally. And again, we're debating about water. So from there, another way to think about it, like how do I determine it? It reminds me of like the food pyramid, but this is like from the elements of value. And so this is a fun one to work through as well when you're, thinking about your product and the positioning of your product. How much value are you providing? How are you moving up that food chain? The higher you get on the food chain, the more likely people are to spend more. So that goes back to our friend, the water analogy. Fiji or liquid death, all of those are trying to have like that, especially liquid death, like that life-changing experience. So they're going to charge more because they're moving up that pyramid. But think about where you are in the pyramid and what that means for your product and consequently the associated pricing. So other thing to consider, B2B, B2C, different types of approaches too. And again, AI has not changed how things are purchased from an enterprise versus a consumer perspective. So keep these points in mind. B2B still expects more handholding. They still expect more customization. They still expect more integrations. They still expect you to be on their approved vendor list. All of that has not changed. On the B2C side, we've got a lot of options. So make sure that you've got something that differentiates you. Make sure that it's simple, easy to use. Make sure that it's clear what the value is and how you're getting it. So again, as you think about, your going to market approach, think about who you're going to market with. And this should be something that you identified way back in the earlier series. We talked about discovery and definition, but in case you hadn't thought about it earlier, please make sure you do. I also will give out, frameworks like this. Steve Blank is, an entrepreneur, again, does a lot in the startup space. And some folks are like, how do I know what my value is? And so how do I know where I fit into that value pyramid? So here's an example for you that you can use from Steve Blank. Just think about your company, fill in that X, Y, and Z, and that can help you determine and clarify what your value is. Again, this is something you can put out into the market and test, get feedback from. But it's often good to have that statement because again, it's something that your investors will likely ask. It's something that your customers are going to ask. It's something you may end up asking yourself on a really hard day. And so, here's a framework to help you define what your value is. I use this with a lot of, the startups that I work with because it just really helps center us and be able to then focus on what we're going to do going forward.
And then just a quick question, because I love this slide and I love a lot of the frameworks you kind of shared. So I think about, see, sorry if you hear my daughter laughing in the background, but for Z, right? Unique, right? And sorry about that. For the unique way your product or service delivers that value.
Yeah, totally.
I'll type it out. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you could clarify that based on similar products, and Chris, not to pick on you here, but like if you have Tasker versus TaskRabbit, they're both delivering certain things similarly, But for Tasker, it's obviously more value. The students get paid better, or it helps that. So like, how do you determine that with things that are similar value, but might have very different end results?
Yeah, and I would go back to the X, the target customer is going to be different. And so from that perspective, build into that their specific need. So there's going to be specific differentiation from what, Chris is doing versus what TaskRabbit can provide. So it also is a challenge for you to be able to identify that differentiation and then be able to format it into a sentence that then allows people to have that clear differentiation in your head, because Brian's saying if it's fuzzy to you, it's going to be really fuzzy to your customers. And so you want to ensure that there's clear differentiation between you and what people already have a mental model around. And so here's an example, from coffee. We help the world wake up by delivering internationally curated coffee, B2B software company, printing service. So again, different opportunities just to riff on these, but just giving some examples to run from. And then again, more guidance around how to apply it. So again, I'll share out these slides and you can use it, play with it, see if it's a framework you like. And then from there, I just throw in AI every once in a while because I realize it's probably top of mind for a lot of people. But just giving an example as well about the evolution, what we were talking about before. So this is an example of one of the companies that, had come in a certain way in the market and then changed their direction. And so they thought about, text generation tools, and then they pivoted to writing. And so again, you're going to find things that really resonate with you. But when you go through your value and you talk to your customers and you get that feedback, it may find that there's a certain part of your offering that they really, really like. And that then may become, the kernel that you run with and expand into your business over time. So be okay to be able to adjust and pivot based on the feedback you have, just as Jasper did, just as, we talked about Instagram, we talked about Slack. It's okay to pivot and focus on what really resonates with people. And that will allow you to build your business and allow you to see and gain insight into, what you want to do. Other things just to keep in mind, again, from the AI perspective, Claude is a famous one for just, going out with a certain type of pricing, changing it. They were blocking OpenClaw, increasing the prices that were going to be charged for people that were using the API access. They just went back on that. And so again, just watch what's happening in the market, because that's great signal for you before you make, a similar pivot or a similar, goof. So just again, be aware of what's happening out there. AI powered models. Upwork has a great talent marketplace. So again, just giving an example of other ways that people are positioning themselves in the marketplace. This was really great. Their stat that they're using in the market, again, goes back to that Steve Blank value. This is one of the examples of how they're using that. And then just things to think about, for yourself. What type of things do you want to put out to AI? What types of things do you want to keep with a human? And I've given you lots of reasons, to keep the human, lots of reasons to use and leverage AI. But just think about which pieces of the business you really want to use and retain as a human-driven factor. And to be honest, I really believe those are going to be the differentiations. AI is something that everybody has access to. We all can tell when things are built by AI. They all look very, very similar. And so, again, the human is where that uniqueness comes in. What are the factors of your business that you want to reflect the unique facets of you? And those are the ones I do recommend keeping human. And so, again, I'm going to put out these slides just on the business model side. I always have stories and analogies that I like to use, but just from this perspective, it's hard to think about the business model and how you're going to create it. And so let's envision a castle. Of course, we all live in castles. And so, what does a castle and a business model have in common? So, you've got this drawbridge, you've got our castle, you've got our moat. So, those are all the facets that make up our quote home. And then what does that mean for a business sense? The drawbridge are the rules. It determines who can get into the castle and who can't. Our castle has a really strong foundation. Again, those are the elements that make your business solid, enable you to scale. And that moat is the proprietary bit. Those are the things that others can't replace. And so, even though we're talking about a castle, there's commonalities with our approach to companies and to what we're building. And so here's just some examples. That foundation of the castle, you want to be able to have that decision point around what you're going to do and what you're not, which goes back to what we talked about in earlier sessions around discovery and definition. That helps us determine what we're going to do and not do. Foundations, all houses have a foundation. It's okay to have it be something that people can replicate. The moat, on the other hand, nope, that's proprietary. That shouldn't be something that people can replicate. So again, what are those elements that are going to be unique to your business? And again, my guidance is to really think about this from a human perspective. And then those drawbridge. That's going to be certain customers you're going to, target. That's going to be pricing is going to be something that's going to cause some people to, use your product or not use your product. But think about those facets that, allow people into your castle or, just turn other people off. And then from there, again, just think about how you're going to learn and evolve based on all of that. And then here's just some things to keep in mind as you're thinking about how you're going to construct your castle. And then another question for yourself to consider. And then that's it. So yeah, a lot of information. Again, I'll share out the slides. Chris, I'm going to put them out in the product channel. And so then you'll see the link to the prior slides too. And any questions, just reach out to me. Happy to talk to anybody, just to talk about these things further or, just pivot in a different way. So thank you very much today, you guys. I appreciate it.
Diana, I do have a question.
Your
Oh,
time.
please. Yeah.
So if everyone is using Lovable to build websites, it's almost like table stakes. You should have this really nice website. Does that not make everyone sort of just the same? It all looks alike. Like
Yeah.
and if we don't do that, are we just behind the eight ball? So we have to just sort of do it based on that?
So I think you hit on it perfectly. I think Lovable is amazing for getting feedback quickly. But yes, everything starts to look the same. And so that's the thing you need to keep in mind. You'll get to a certain point with your feedback where you got enough signal to know you're heading in the right direction. And then that's where I think you need to work with a designer, for example, to make your product look unique, because otherwise it will look like everything else. The tools are getting better at incorporating design systems and being able to incorporate your branding, your logo, your fonts, etc. But they're still using pretty much the same components behind the scenes. And so again, I think Lovable, they're all amazing for getting that really, early version. They'll get you, maybe to the medium stage. But when you're really going to go to market and have something that's going to be what you're helping people will pay for the long term, then I still recommend going with designers.
Thank you. Super, super great session. Thank you for all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. So I know we're over. So again, thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
Appreciate all the insights.
Thank you, Diana.
Um,
Excellent stuff.
Yeah,
Excellent.
No problem.
sounds good. We'll keep
Talk
in
to you
touch.
later.
Great. Take care, all.
Thanks.
Thank you.